What's up, guys? Alex Scott here with jamplay.com, and welcome to week 2 of my all-new course, Radical Rhythms, Understanding Musical Time on Guitar and Bass. Now, I'm really excited to have you guys back with me for the second week of the course. At least I had a lot of fun in the first week. I hope you guys did as well. If there's anybody joining us for the first time, thanks so much for tuning in. I am going to do a quick recap here in a minute of how the whole course is kind of working, what we're talking about, all that kind of stuff. If you were here for last week, then you guys can kind of bear with me through that for a second, but I know that some people sometimes missed the first week or are just tuning in for the first time, so I just wanted to get you guys up to speed real quick. Basically, this whole course is about kind of the other half of music. A lot of the courses that I personally have taught here at Jamplay, and just a lot of the courses that we do in general, are a little bit more focused on notes and chords and scales and all that kind of stuff, which are obviously very important no matter what instrument you play. But I kind of got to thinking when the Jamplay guys were like, hey, let's do another live course, I started to think about anything that I hadn't taught yet, or anything that I could think of that wasn't covered super in depth on the site. And the one thing that I realized that I at least had never really talked about was rhythm, and how critical rhythm is to all of music, and really breaking it down and talking about time signatures and subdivisions and rhythmic phrasing and all this kind of stuff, and trying to design a course that will apply just as much to guitar players as it will as to bass players, or even if you play keyboards or anything like that. Absolutely anybody can use this course the way that I've set it up. So we're basically just going through 10 weeks, again this is week 2, of just looking at all different aspects of rhythm. So last week, in the first week we started relatively basic, at least conceptually basic, with quarter notes, eighth notes, 16th notes, and then dotted notes. Which are, to me, kind of the absolute ground floor when we're talking about rhythm. Now, the other thing that we talked about a little bit last week that we're going to be getting into much more seriously this week in this lesson here today, which is subdivisions, and the idea of what exactly that word means. And all subdivisions are, if you don't remember from last week, is how we are chopping up our time. Right? So we talked about 4/4 as a time signature last week, where you have 4 beats in a measure, and each of those notes is a quarter note, or counted as a quarter note. And then subdivisions in that context, like we talked about, is just cutting a quarter note in half. What do you get? An eighth note. You cut an eighth note in half. What do you get? A 16th note. Right? So when we're talking about subdividing, which again we're going to get into a whole different way to look at subdividing here in a minute, but when you're talking about subdividing in the context of 4/4 and you get down to those 16th notes, you're subdividing by 4, right? Or 16, depending on how you're looking at it. But really, you're taking those quarter notes, which give you your time, right? 4/4 time, 4 quarter notes in one bar. When you cut each of those quarter notes into 4 pieces, subdivide them into 4 pieces, you get 16th notes. So that's mainly what we looked at last week. Now, another quick note for anyone who is joining us for the first time this week, kind of in how the course is working. You guys are probably used to having notation, specific notes and stuff that you're going to be playing. This course, because I am trying to appeal to as many of you as possible and relate this stuff to as many of you as possible, I chose to not structure the exercises that way. Instead, I'm using what we call slash notation, which just basically gives you the general outline of the rhythm that we're playing, okay? Just kind of as a reference. And then I do have backing tracks, like I always do, some super cool backing tracks that you guys get to practice along with. But instead of doing chord progressions or like specific bass lines or melody lines or anything like that, they're just static vamps in one key. So it's just kind of one chord the whole way through. And what I want you guys to do with these exercises, and this applies to all 10 weeks of the course, is to try to figure out your own exercise. So if you're a bass player like myself, you can play single notes and play around with the rhythms. You could superimpose a scale over the rhythm, a little A dominant scale or whatever key we're in, which I believe we're in the key of A today. If you're a guitar player, you could pick single notes, just pick an A anywhere on your neck. You could strum chords along to the rhythm. You could also do scales or practice little pentatonic shapes or something. The main thing that I want you guys to focus on with these exercises is the rhythm and really trying to understand the context of the rhythmic concepts that we're talking about. I don't want you guys to get hung up trying to learn some exact line that I've written or anything like that. I want you guys to just be focusing more on the feel and the time and all that kind of stuff. And that also opens it up for you guys to kind of kill a couple of birds with one stone. Where, let's say, if you're a guitar player and you're trying to practice your lead playing, use these rhythms as an opportunity to practice alternate picking or, any kind of scalar shapes or anything like that. If you have anything in particular that you're working on in the note arena, you can take that and apply it to these exercises and kind of do them in conjunction and work on multiple things at once. So hopefully you guys will find a lot of flexibility in your practice routines as you guys are working with these examples. So I think it's a cool idea, and I hope that it's helpful for you guys. So that should get any newcomers caught up to speed with what we're trying to do. So let's go ahead and look at what we are talking about today. Now, again, last week we talked about 8th notes and 16th notes, which is subdividing by 2 and 4, right? So what happens? Let's pose a theoretical question. What happens when you decide to subdivide by 3s instead of by 4s, or by 3s instead of by 2s, okay? You get triplets. And that is what today's lesson is all about, triplets. And that really is the most basic definition of a triplet, is looking at your bar and subdividing in groups of 3 as opposed to in groups of 2. Now, you can look at it in 2 different very basic ways, because we're thinking about the 4/4 time signature, right? Where we have 4 quarter notes within a bar. Well, the easiest way to work with triplets in a 4/4 context is by doing 8th note triplets, okay? So now what is an 8th note triplet? An 8th note triplet is simply where you take the amount of time where you'd normally be subdividing 1 quarter note into 2 8th notes, right? Which would be 1 beat. And you would have 2 8th notes within that beat, subdividing by 2s, quarter note, 8th notes, right? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, okay? But when you look at 8th note triplets, you, instead of taking those 2 8th notes per beat, you subdivide by 3, and you get 3 8th note triplets in that same beat, that same amount of space. So the notes end up happening faster, but instead of every 1 and being 2 notes, 2 and being 2 notes, you're putting 3 notes there. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, which at the same tempo, if this is our tempo, okay, 3 8th notes, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 8th triplets. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. Okay, see what I'm saying? So you just take that normal grouping of 2 8th notes, you could call them twins, and you replace it with 3 notes that occupy the same amount of time. So now you're subdividing by 3s instead of subdividing by 2s. And that is the basis for the groove that we're looking at here today. Now, this is used in a lot of different contexts in popular music. I have a couple of songs that, if we get to it, I can play a few seconds of, really well-known songs that you guys will immediately recognize, that feature drum grooves and kind of feature rhythmic patterns that are built around this whole idea of subdividing by 3 instead of by 2 on the 8th note. Okay, like I said, we'll get to those if we have time, but in the meantime, I have this exercise written out, or this time, really, this kind of time idea, written out in 2 different ways. We're going to kind of compare and contrast 2 different ways to write it, 2 different ways to think about this. And then I have, again, the track, which we're going to play alongside, and the groove in the track is very, very similar to a lot of these other kind of triplet-based grooves that will really showcase exactly what I'm talking about in terms of a feel. So there's really 2 different ways to break this down in your head. One of them seems more complicated, but does a really good job of illustrating some of the higher level concepts that we're going to be talking about through the rest of the course. The other way of looking at it is a lot simpler, but kind of illustrates a different thing. So if we're basing everything around 4/4 time, right, how would you write 4/4 with eighth note triplets? Let's, can we get the notation up on the screen? If you look at the bottom line, okay, the one that starts with the 4/4 time signature, so the very bottom line, you'll see that we have eighth notes written, but they have this little bracket with the number 3 above them, right? That denotes a triplet versus just kind of your typical eighth notes. Now, obviously, as you can see, if these were normal eighth notes, we would only have 8 in the bar, right? So now, if you count them up, and you can do basic multiplication, 4 groups of 3 means, that we have 12 eighth notes in our bar of 4/4. We have subdivided each beat by 3 instead of by 2. We have 4 beats in the bar, each one subdivided by 3. 3 times 4 is 12, which is where you will see the second way to think about this particular rhythm, which is the top line, where you see at the beginning where it says 12/8. That means that now we are thinking of our bar in a totally different way. We're thinking of it as 12 eighth notes, right? Because last week we talked about in 4/4 time, again, bottom line, we have 4 quarter notes. We have 4 beats in the bar, each one being denoted as a quarter note. When you subdivide each of those quarter notes by 3, you get eighth note triplets, meaning you get 4 groups, of eighth note triplets. Looking at it in a totally different way, you say, okay, well, why don't we just call our kind of baseline for the bar as eighth notes? Instead of thinking in quarter notes, now we're thinking in eighth notes. And if we have 4 groups of 3 eighth notes, well, then we have 12 eighth notes in every bar, and you get 12/8 time. And it simplifies, as you can see, you don't have to use those brackets or those 3s. It simplifies how you write the rhythm, but it's also just a different way to think about it. So if we look at the bottom line first, when I was writing this notation, I should have put these in the bottom one on top. Sorry. But if we think of it from the perspective of the bottom line, and we have our quarter note is here, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Now turn each of those into a group of 3 eighth notes. 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 1. That's how you'd think of the bottom one. But you're still feeling this pulse of 4/4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1. Right? As opposed to the top line, our 12/8 kind of expression of this idea. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Hard to talk that fast. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay? Now again, just to compare and contrast from a normal eighth note where we're subdividing by 2, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 1, 2, 3. Eighths, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and triplets. 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a. Okay? So as you can already tell, it's a really cool, kind of a groovy feel to get into. And what we call this feel in kind of casual musical parlance, you don't have to even think of it as being this complicated, or if somebody's trying to teach you a tune that features this feel, there is a name for it. We call it a shuffle. And as I said, there's a few very famous examples of a groove exactly like this. We'll get to those in a bit. But it's a really cool feel. It's very jazzy. It feels very swung. And it just has a really, really unique, really unique groove to it. But it's just a really, really great way to look at how you think about triplets, okay? Because triplets you will totally understand what they are when you hear them. Like the most common place that we usually use triplets, within like rock music, is within lead lines or melodies. So like anytime you hear, pretending I'm a guitarist for a second, let's say we're playing an E, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And let's say you go to take a solo. 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Those were all eighth note triplets. Even though our pulse is here, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3. Eighth notes, right? Standard eighth notes. 1, 2, 3, 4. And a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 1. Everybody's heard a guitar player do that at some point or another, right? Jimmy Page, Hendrix, Eric Clapton, all had licks like that that are based around triplets. But when you really break it down and you want to look at the more kind of technical side of it, this is how we think about it in terms of like rhythmic theory or whatever you want to call it. This is how a triplet is actually functioning, okay? It's this difference in what you're subdividing by. Now, you can extrapolate this whole subdivided by a different number idea out into infinity. You could subdivide quarter notes by fives and end up with quintuplets as opposed to triplets, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4. Daga, daga, da, daga, daga, da, daga, daga, da, da. I'm not going to go into that right now because that's a pretty weird one. But in theory, you could subdivide by 3, you could subdivide by 2, 4, obviously 5, 6, 7. You could subdivide by 27 if you really wanted to. But it does get to a point where it gets a little bit impractical. But obviously the most common thing that you'll see in any music is subdividing the way that we're doing it here, which is by 3s instead of 2s or 3s instead of 4s, and you get triplets, okay? Now this doesn't just apply to eighth notes. You could very well encounter quarter note triplets, 2, 3, 4, which is basically you end up superimposing 6 quarter notes, right? Take 12 eighth notes, cut that in half, you would get 6 quarter note triplets, which can be very deceptively tricky to count. 3, 4, So if our pulse is here, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Those would be quarter note triplets. 16th triplets, I can't clap that fast, but you can imagine the same thing where you're subdividing a quarter note into 4 16th notes. Again, put 3 where 2 were, you would get 6 16th note triplets per quarter note. Right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So you can do triplets at any level of subdivision, whether it's quarters, eighths. I mean, you could even do half note triplets, would be weird, but they technically exist, and I'm sure you could find lots of cool examples of them. But the one that we're looking at is eighth note triplets because that's kind of the most common thing that you'll hear in a groove, and it's just where it sits within the spectrum of speed of these rhythms. It's the most common, it's the easiest to think about, and it's the easiest to understand. Looks like we might have a quick question coming in here.
Quick question here.
Excellent.
This is from Dave.
Greetings, Dave.
How does 6/8 time factor into all of this?
Oh, Dave, you're getting ahead of me, buddy. And you are a very, very smart cookie. So 6/8 factors into it. Basically, you can think of, what's the best way to explain this? Just so you know, as a heads up, we're going to be talking about 3, 4, and 6/8 time all of, I believe it's next week. It's either next week or the week after that. But I have a whole week that's going to be dedicated to 3, 4, and 6/8. When we get into looking at odd time signatures, that's the first one that we're going to look at. So Dave brings up an excellent, excellent point. And this just gets into feeling different rhythms, the whole, like, amongst all of these things, and not necessarily subdividing things in different ways, but grouping things in different ways, okay? So I'll get into this more in the week where we talk about 3, 4, and 6/8 time. But to superimpose a 6, I'd say 6/4 is easier to think about, groupings of 6 quarter notes. Let's look at our notation again real quick. Okay, this is going to be easier to think of in terms of the 12/8. So the top, we're looking at the top bar where we have these groupings of eighth notes, right? 12 eighth notes in one bar. 6/4 would say that you have 6 quarter notes in one bar. So you could count 12/8, our top line here, as 6/4, and what ends up happening is that you start looking at every other eighth note, right? So, because to group them into twos. So you've taken your normal eighth notes in a bar of 4/4. You've turned each one into an eighth note triplet. So there's now 3 eighth notes where 2 eighth notes used to be, okay? Then you take those 12 eighth notes and group them back into twos. What do you end up with? 6 groups of 2 eighth notes. Or what do 2 eighth notes equal? A quarter note. 6 groups of, or 6 quarter notes, okay? Now we're in 6/4. So just to count that, here's our pulse. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. There's our 12/8 pulse. To put that into 6/4, group those eighth notes by twos. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 3, 5, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And just to bring the circle all the way around, those then become, if you're still thinking about your pulse being here, quarter note triplets. Okay? All of this stuff weaves together in a really, really beautiful way. And actually, thank you very much, Dave, for chiming in with that, because that really helps to illustrate one of my most basic, kind of fundamental underlying points that I want to really convey throughout this whole course, which is that rhythms, like obviously we all know, especially when you learn about modes and stuff, scales and chords, they all fit together in their own funky ways, where if we look at a C major scale, and you start a C major scale on the note A, you get an A minor scale as opposed to a C major scale, but you're using the same notes from the C major scale, right? Chords and scales have their own patterns, and they fit into each other in all kinds of interesting ways. But when we're talking about rhythms, there's this incredibly beautiful world of just patterns of how all this stuff fits together and different ways that you can think about it. And, you know, again, this whole thing of like, well, you can count it in 4 and use eighth note triplets, or call eighth notes your bass, realize that there's 12 of them in a bar, and count it in 12/8. You can then change the accent pattern. Instead of accenting every 3, you accent every 2, and you end up thinking in 6/8. Right? It's everything weaves together. Everything comes back around. And it's all really just breaks down to, are you counting in 2s or are you counting in 3s? Because if you're counting in 3s, you're thinking about triplets. If you're counting in 2s, you're thinking about what we call straight time, or eighth notes, 16th notes, all even. And there's even a gradation between those two things when you get into swing and varying degrees of swing. We're not going to get into that today, because that's a whole other can of worms to open up. But in any case, that's all, I guess, a very long-winded and prosaic answer to the question of how does 6/8 or 6/4 fit into all of this, which is it fits in very, very nicely. So thanks again for that question. But you're probably sitting there staring at the screen going, what in the heck does this have to do with music and how I play my instrument? Let's discuss that. So like I said, I have a really cool track that I've put together that features a groove that's very, very similar to a couple of these famous grooves, which I am just going to play a few of those real quick so I can show you guys what I mean. Now, I will preface this for legal reasons with saying that these are being shown in a purely educational context. I'm not going to play very much of the songs, but I will tell you what each one is so you can go and listen to the whole thing on your own. The first tune that is one of my personal favorite examples of this is the tune Home at Last by Steely Dan. Now, the drummer on this track is Bernard Purdie, who's one of the most legendary session drummers of all time. He's fantastic. And if you listen, and we'll count alongside the tune for 10 or 15 seconds here so you can get an idea of what I'm talking about. He's playing this shuffle groove, and there's a slow quarter note pulse going the whole time, but you'll hear that he's playing eighth note triplets throughout his whole groove. 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 3 and a 4 and a 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 1. Okay? So it's a really, really cool feel. You'll hear the same feel in a tune that I'm sure, especially any guitar players out there will know, Fool in the Rain by Led Zeppelin. 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 1. 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 1. So you have this quarter note pulse this whole time, right? 1, 2, but. You could even think of it as 16th note triplets, depending on where you're hearing the snare drum is hitting, whether you think of it as halftime or not. But the feel is there. And the last example is this classic number that everybody will immediately recognize, Rosanna by Toto. It's faster. But if you hear the quarter note as being there, or I guess that would be the 8th note, so this would be 16th note triplets. Okay? So again, that's Home at Last by Steely Dan, Fool in the Rain by Zeppelin, and Rosanna by Toto. Go listen to those 3 tunes all the way through and really pay attention to the groove, because it's a constant stream of triplets the whole way through, which is exactly what we're talking about. So now I'm going to pull up the track that I've prepared for us for today. Oh, and by the way, quick note before we get into this, just so you guys know, Dave just chimed in with that great question there. In just a minute here, we're going to play through this track a couple times, talk about a few more things. I love questions. I love it when you guys chat in with questions. Captain Chris, our director, is here with me, monitoring Facebook and everywhere else that this is streaming. So if you have any questions about the lesson today, about rhythm in general, or anything else for that matter, whether it's music theory, gear, recording, really anything, I love getting questions. I love going back and forth with you guys, having a little bit of dialogue. So please get those questions up on screen, chat them in, type them in wherever you are. And Chris will get them up on screen here in a moment, and we can do some Q&A. But anyways, the track that I have assembled for us today, again, it's in the key of A. It's an A dominant chord, and you get to hear me do my best to play Hammond organ, which is pretty amusing, because I am not an organ player in any way. But I'm using the same kind of a groove, okay? A very shuffly, triplet-oriented groove that has this underlying, again, you could call it a 12/8 feel or an 8th note triplet feel, but really we just call it a shuffle. It has that feel going the whole time. So you'll hear bucket to bucket to bucket to bucket to 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a. That pulse is going the whole time. So in terms of what you guys want to play along with this, I'm going to start just by playing single notes. Okay? You can do that if you're a bass player and you're playing along. You can do that 5th fret E string. You can do that on your open A, 12th fret A string, 7th fret D string, 2nd fret G string, 14th fret G string. Okay? You could also, this is really great for doing a couple of pentatonic exercises with. That's a great one, especially for guitar players. If you're a lead guitar player, that's just, that would be an A minor pentatonic, but that would work here. Right? Just your basic A pentatonic shape kind of going in between those notes. Again, the main thing that I want you guys to focus on here is not what you're playing. I mean, obviously, if you're trying to work on a specific scale or shape or something, you want to focus on it. But what I'm trying to drive home here is just the feel, just the rhythmic idea. I want to get you guys used to playing in this kind of a triplet feel. And it's going to make it a lot easier when you encounter triplets in the wild, in other songs, or if you're like learning a solo from somebody or something like that. It's going to make it a lot easier to understand on a more fundamental level what's going on and where your notes all need to line up, okay? So, I'm going to pull up the groove, and I'm going to play along. Like I said, I'll probably start with single notes. I might do some pentatonic stuff. We'll see. I'll try to talk about it as I'm playing along. And we're just going to run through this a couple times, explore a few different ideas, and then we can get on to some of your questions. So, here we go. 2, 3, 4. 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 1. Around the neck. Now, one thing that you'll notice, whether you're alternate picking or fingerstyle playing your bass like me, the accent, the quarter note accent, 1, 2, 3, 4, because you're grouping in threes, whether, whether you're doing fingers or pick, your accent's going to be changing each time. So if you're going pick, it might be down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. I don't have a pick in my hand, but you get the idea. With fingers, that accent's trading between index and middle. Index, middle, index, middle, index, middle, right? 4 and a 1 and a 2 and a 3. Okay? So that's another kind of a fun way to think about this whole 2 versus 3 thing. Is it because, you have a down and an upstroke with your pick, or you have an index and a middle with your, if you're plucking bass like I am, those accents are going to trade because you're doing patterns of 2 over patterns of 3, right? But either way, if you're strumming chords alongside that, it's just something where you want to just really, really focus on that groove and getting locked in with that. But also, in this particular instance, still playing those accents, still making sure that you're not just going ya ga 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 all even. You want to think about, really accenting those quarter notes still, because that's going to help you line up with the groove and line up with the rest of the band. Okay, so let's go through and run that again. And actually, another quick thing that I want to mention for you guys, if you are a JamPlay member, a subscriber, go to the site, find the supplemental content for this course, because I've also included drum-only versions of these tracks where it's just the drum groove. So if you want to practice this particular groove but do it in a different key, maybe as a writing tool or something like that, you can load up the drum-only version, and it'll just be the drum groove. It'll still have the count in and everything, but it's just the drums. So you can play along, you could do the same kind of a thing, do these same exercises, but do it in the key of G or D or C or A flat or B flat or, whatever key you want to do it in. You can pull up that drum-only version, and it will allow you to do that. So that's a kind of a cool perk. If you are a JamPlay subscriber, you can get access to that drum-only version of this and every other track we're going to be using in this whole course. If you're not a JamPlay subscriber, why aren't you? Head over to the site, subscribe. It's great. It's an awesome, awesome time and a great resource if you're learning about music. So anyways, A dominant. Let's run through the track one more time. This time I'm going to try to move around and do some more of this pentatonic stuff that I was talking about. But again, it's totally up to you guys. Whatever you're trying to work on, I might try to get a normal major or dominant scale in there too, and give you guys some different ideas of stuff to do with that. And then, of course, if you're just strumming chords, a great thing to experiment with if you are just kind of playing rhythm along with this on guitar is to accent, keep the strum consistent. 3 and a 4 and a 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a, right? But using muting, accent. Using muting, experiment with different patterns of where you're letting the notes ring through or you're just strumming muted strings. You can come up with some really cool stuff like that. That creates some new accent patterns in there and will help you guys practice that kind of strumming muted versus strumming chords. That's a great one to do alongside something like this and just experiment with different groupings of, okay, I'm going to do, muted chord, muted chord, muted chord in groups of 3 or something like that. The main thing is that you're just really paying attention to keeping that eighth note triplet rhythm nice and consistent. So, all that being said, let's go ahead. We're going to run through the track one more time. I'm going to get a little bit busier, try to give you guys some more ideas. But again, 2, 3, 4. We're really just paying attention to the drums and locking with this groove. So, single note. Paying attention to that accent as well. Okay, let's try a pentatonic thing. Try a scale. That's just a very basic scale exercise in A dominant. Or you could do a straight scale, up and down. Work around it, do some solo-y stuff. Okay. Now, obviously, I'm kind of going off the cuff there. Some of that stuff is a little bit more advanced. Some of that is a little bit more difficult to get onto your fingers. But if it is, that's totally okay. Just focus on the single picking. Just pick one note and just pick away at that, or just, fret an A dominant voicing wherever you feel comfortable in your instrument, and just strum along. 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 1 and a 2, and get used to the feel, get used to the groove. Pay attention to the drums, pay attention to all the other elements in the track, the organ and everything. Once you start to get that groove under your fingers, you can start doing little simple lead lines, but, break it down into... just that little, something really easy that's just a couple of frets. Work your way up to being able to kind of move through it on the more advanced stuff. Also, if the tempo is a little bit challenging, feel free to set up your metronome. Most good metronome apps will have an option to do something like 12/8 time, where you can go in and edit, from where it says 4/4, you can change the 4 to a 12 and change the other 4 to an 8. You might need like a, one of the $2 or $3 metronome apps that you actually have to pay for. But trust me, if you don't already have one, it's 1,000% worth it. They're really, really useful tools. Or if you use like recording software, something like Audacity or Logic Pro or GarageBand or something like that, there will be an option when you set up your song file or what have you to set it up to be in 12/8 time. So for this particular groove or this particular exercise, you could definitely set something up that way so that you have a click track or a metronome that's sitting there going, right? Playing 12/8 notes so that you can really lock in with it. Take that, slow the tempo down to where you're comfortable and you can find some ideas, and then slowly work your way up to playing along with the track. Because that's the tricky thing when you're a beginner about really understanding some of these rhythms, is that stuff can get really, really fast very quickly. In terms of, saying, okay, well, I want to understand how to play 8 triplets. Well, if you have a hard time playing 8 notes, it's going to be a little bit harder to make the jump playing 8 note triplets. But that's not to mean that that's not to say that it's not something that you can think about, or, you're not going to be aware of it or something like that. There's always ways to take something that's a little bit, out of your league difficulty-wise, break it down, slow it down, simplify it a little bit, play it at slower tempos, play it along with the metronome, that kind of stuff, and work your way up to it so that you're still getting the fundamental concept, even if, doing some big, some big complicated scale, lead pattern or something like that is a little bit beyond your skill. That's okay. Don't stress about it. There's always a way to make it a little bit simpler, make it easier on yourself, and kind of get in touch with the concept as a whole. So that's triplets. There's a whole lot of information about triplets for you guys. Triplets are really, really cool. I love triplets. I use them all the time. They can do some really, really fun things in terms of, again, like when we were talking last week about dotted eighth notes. dotted eighth notes versus eighth note triplets, they are timed differently. That's a really complicated topic to get into. Well, not complicated, just hard to think about and play the difference between the two of them. Because they're very similar in terms of how much time an eighth note triplet takes to happen versus a dotted eighth note. You know what I mean? But basically, what you can think about them in a practical sense, you can base grooves around triplets, and that's what it ends up sounding like, what we were just playing along with. But if it's not a triplet bass groove, and it's just a standard boom, clack, boom, boom, clack, boom, clack, boom, boom, clack, just standard 4/4 groove, you can throw triplets into a melody, into a solo, into a rhythm chord pattern, into a bass line to spice it up, to give it a little bit of extra pizzazz here and there. You can take, if you have like a 3-note pattern, like in the context of a pentatonic scale or something like that, you can use triplets to make it line up with everything else. So these are all just little flavors. They're little rhythmic tools. They're little rhythmic ideas that are universally usable. They apply in any style of music. They apply at any tempo. They apply to any groove. You can play triplets over a groove in 11/16 if you really wanted to. It might sound a little odd, but all this stuff works with everything else. It's kind of what I find really interesting about rhythm, is that rhythm is completely interchangeable. If you're playing a C major scale, you're probably not going to ever play a D flat in your C major scale because it's going to sound really weird. Ugh. Unless you're trying to do some really weird avant-garde jazz something or other, you're probably not going to play that note in a C major scale. However, when it comes to rhythm and all these rhythmic patterns and ideas that I'm talking about, it is fair game, man. You can use any rhythmic pattern anywhere and find a way to make it sound cool. I guarantee you that. You could argue the same of chords and of scales and putting weird notes in there like that. But really, in rhythm, it's totally fair game. And so I really, really like that. You kind of get this bag of tricks, but you don't have to worry about as many rules. You can really, once you start to understand these fundamental concepts of subdivision and kind of imposing different times over each other and stuff like that, which we'll talk about more in the polyrhythm lesson, you can do some really cool stuff. You can come up with some really interesting and unique rhythms and really make things your own, just based on rhythmic phrasing and how you use rhythm in the music that you write or the solos that you take or the things that you improvise or what have you. So that's triplets for you. I hope you guys dig it. I hope you guys enjoyed all of that, and I hope that using the supplemental content, like I said, is helpful for you for your next week of practice. But now, I believe it looks like we have a couple of questions to get to, which I'm very excited for.
We do have a couple questions here.
Excellent.
First one's from Patrick.
Greetings, Patrick. Good to have you back, buddy.
Patrick's wanting to know, do they incorporate slash notation with the Nashville number system?
Awesome question, Patrick. Quick background for anybody who's not familiar with Nashville numbers. Nashville numbers is a really interesting and kind of simplified way of writing songs out. So that, like, Nashville numbers came out of in recording sessions or jam sessions, songwriting sessions that happen, kind of started in Nashville. Now everybody uses it everywhere. I use it all the time. It's basically writing down a song in terms of like the intervals of the chords. So if you've got a song that's G, C, and D, instead of writing G, C, and D, you would write 1, G being your root, 4, C being the 4th note in your G scale, and 5 for D, D being the 5th note. I mentioned modes a moment ago. That gets into modes as well, C being the 4th mode of G, D being the 5th mode of G. I won't get super into that. I actually have a whole other course about that you guys can go back and look at. But yes, you can absolutely incorporate slash notation into Nashville numbers. Where I usually see it being done is if there is a specific rhythm that is happening where chords are changing on unusual beats, where it's not just 1 bar of G and 1 bar of C and 1 bar of G and 1 bar of D, where it's just 1, 4, 1, 5. If you, for instance, had something, say your pulse is here, 1, 2, 3, 4. G, F, C, 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 D, G, F, where it's that kind of a thing, you could write that rhythm out as, a dotted eighth, etc., etc. Use a little bar of just slash notation to write that rhythm out, and then put the numbers over the corresponding notes within the notation. And that then you could sit down and read and go, okay, 1, flat 7, 4, 4, 4, 5. 1, flat 7, 4, 4, 4, 5, right? It's very, very useful for that. And a lot of times you'll have songwriters who write something and they say, oh, it's a really easy song, but there's this one specific rhythm that happens in the bridge or something where we all go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, and 3, 4, 1. They have some little rhythmic pattern that happens where the whole band's hitting those chords all together, and the drums are emphasizing them with a crash cymbal or what have you. Slash notation totally comes into play there and is a very useful part of writing out quick charts like that, because your only other option would be to sit there and long form on a proper staff write out the chord voicings alongside the rhythms and the ties and all that kind of stuff. But when you're just, again, the whole idea of the Nashville Numbers system is to kind of chicken scratch out a chart real quick to throw to a buddy at a jam session or something. And in that context, having a little bit of slash in there is really, really useful for getting rhythmic points across in the context of showing them the chords as well. And another quick thing about the Nashville Numbers system, if you're saying, well, why use numbers instead of chords? It's so that you can easily change the key. So let's say you're at a jam session. The guitar player says, hey, does everybody know Superstition by Stevie Wonder? And everybody except the bass player goes, yes, absolutely. And the guitar player goes, okay, I do it in D flat because I'm weird. And the keyboard player goes, oh, I normally do it in E. And the singer goes, actually, can we do it in F? Because that's where my voice is good. I can't sing low enough to get down to the D flat or whatever. Can we do it in F instead? And the bass player goes, well, I don't know the song at all. So what do we do? You can write it out in Nashville Numbers and then just say, hey, everybody, F is 1. And then any good working musician will know that, okay, 1 to the 5, flat 6, 5, flat 5, 4 progression in that song. If 1 is F, 5 is C, flat 6 is C sharp, 5 is C again, sharp 4, flat 5 would be B, and then B flat or A sharp would be the 4. So you can read and transpose the song into any key based on, oh, I do that song, but I do it in a different key than the original. Or if a singer needs to be like, oh, I'm having trouble singing this, can we bring it down a whole step or a half step? Nashville Numbers means that you don't have to scrap the whole chart and rewrite it in a different key. You just say, okay, 1 is now G flat instead of G. And then the whole band can very easily just transpose the whole song down a half step, as opposed to everybody going, okay, tear up my chart, write a whole new one. It just goes down a half step. So that's Nashville Numbers. And to answer your question, which, again, thanks very much for chiming in, Patrick. Awesome question. Slash is definitely a huge part of Nashville Numbers when it needs to be. So super cool. Thank you, sir.
All right. Next question is from Maria Luisa. Mm-hmm. I have not succeeded with the dotted eighth notes. I tried to slow it down and still can't get it. How would you practice count this slower?
Indeed. Great question, Maria. Dotted eighths are notoriously tricky. And after everything that I've said about triplets and breaking things down in threes, this might be a tiny bit confusing, but I'm going to do my best, because the easiest way to think of dotted notes is to think of them in threes. But it's a different kind of 3 than the triplets that we were talking about earlier. So let me pull up a metronome for us real quick. And by the way, don't feel bad. That's, dotted eighths, that's the most difficult thing we talked about last week. And they definitely trip a lot of people up because it can feel very unnatural to play them alongside something, because you have this very kind of jilted, stuttery thing that happens. And so it's definitely common to have a little bit of trouble with that. So let's see here. I've got my metronome application pulled up here. We're going to set our metronome to a nice even 90 beats per minute. Okay. Actually, you know what? You can go a little bit slower than that. Let's go 80. So we're 80 beats per minute. That's our quarter note, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So now, a dotted eighth in this context, like we talked about last week, a dotted eighth is what you get when you take an eighth and you add an extra 16th note onto it. So an eighth note is 2 16th notes, right? So if we think about standard eighth notes, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now, take that eighth note, cut it in half, you get 16ths. 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a, right? You don't have to be like clapping along that fast or anything. I'm just talking conceptually, just talking the idea behind it. So if you take an eighth note and you add that extra 16th note's worth of time onto it, you get a dotted eighth. So the easiest way to think about it is to get that 16th note pulse into your head. 2, 3, 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a ba 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 ba, right? Group those into threes. So basically you can just count 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 like that, okay? There you have the 16th note pulse, but you're grouping it into threes in your head. And you can even start by just talking this out like I'm doing right now, just to get the idea into your head. You don't have to worry about immediately translating it to your hands because you want to understand the concept. 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1. Okay? Then you can keep talking it out, but grab your instrument and only play when you say the word 1. 3, 4. 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1. Okay? Another thing that could help you is if you can set up your metronome to play eighth notes like this. Oh, sorry, not like that. And a very easy way to do that, by the way, if anybody's wondering, is if you have your metronome set at, say, 80 BPM, like I have mine right now, just double it, 160. And you get eighth notes, right? Because eighth notes are half of a quarter note, so it's going twice as fast. So, again, our quarter note is still here. It's just now clicking in eighth notes. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. 16ths. 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4, right? Subdividing into those 16th notes. So you take that same pulse, but just say it in threes. 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3. Take the 1 in that and apply it to your hands. 3 4 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1. Okay. And then once you're used to the rhythm and you've connected the talking part and the playing part, you should be able to translate it straight across to just being able to play it. And you can do that at slower tempos. Like if we went down to, say, 70 BPM at eighth notes. 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4. There's your 16ths. 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4. Group them in threes. 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1. That's a really easy way to think about it. Okay. Now again, I'm not even going to mention what we were talking about earlier with triplets and how you count those in threes. Totally different thing, because right now we're thinking about strictly 16th notes when it comes to dotted eighths, right? Because that's straight time versus kind of triplet time, where we're still subdividing by twos. We're just grouping things in threes as opposed to subdividing by threes. So, I'm seeing your question just now, Maria. She says, thanks, Alex. How do you not start tapping your foot or nodding your head on the 1? Also, practice. And again, this can be really, really challenging stuff to get used to, especially for players who are new to their instruments. And it's not even, again, for you, Maria, I'm not sure what level you're at as a player. But it's not, dotted eighths are not like something that's super, super critical to be able to play perfectly as a beginner. You're not going to encounter it as a rhythm super, super often. And more often than not, when you do encounter it as a rhythm, you just, you're trying to learn a simple melody or something. You don't even realize that you're playing a dotted note. It's just part of a larger thing. It's more of a concept. So I would even argue that that particular part of the exercise is like not something, if you can't play it, almost don't worry about it. Because it's more conceptual than it is something where somebody, you're going to be in a band someday or something, and somebody's going to go, play dotted eighths right now, and then fire you if you can't. Like, that's not really the idea. I would be more aware of the concept of it and just kind of try to get the message of it, of what is a dotted note. It's what happens when you add half the time value of a note to that note and hold it for a little bit of extra time. And then be more aware of just the whole general idea of subdividing eighth notes, 16th notes, what those look like, and how 4 goes into 2 goes into 1, if you know what I mean. So I totally understand your frustration with those. Hopefully the kind of counting in threes thing helps. Not getting stuck to that one can be very difficult. It's something you gotta just work on. But the cool thing with rhythm is that, especially if you try to move your body a little bit and just be aware of how stuff is lining up, it will come to you. It will get easier. And you might start not being able to do it at all, and then you can get through it for a bar, and then you kind of lose it, and you keep working on it and keep thinking about it, keep counting it out, and you'll get to 2 bars, and then you kind of lose it. And then keep thinking about it, keep working out. You'll get to 3 bars and kind of lose it. And then eventually your brain will kind of say, okay, wait, that line's okay. It's an unspoken thing. It's not even something you can really explain. It just suddenly lines up in your head, and you're like, okay, that's a dotted eighth note right there, just like that. Cool. And I'm not even thinking when I do that. I just know how the rhythm feels. And that just takes time. It just takes practice. So hang in there with it. Don't get discouraged. Again, it's not a make or break concept. But yeah, I totally understand your frustration. Hopefully that all helps a little bit. Thanks for chiming in, though. Really appreciate you being here.
Okay, one more question here.
Okay, cool.
One last one from Condors.
Excellent.
And this will lead into you teasing some other things in the course, I'm sure.
Yes.
Most stuff is in 4/4. Do you see time signature change in songs a lot?
Well, greetings, Condors. Thank you so much for tuning in, my friend. Yes, most stuff is in 4/4. So, time signature changes in songs, I would say, is the rarest. 4/4 is the most common. After 4/4, seeing songs that are just in another time signature, like 3/4, a waltz, 6/8 feel, which we have a whole week dedicated to 6/8. Those are the next most common. After that, you start seeing 5/4 or 5/8. Like a very famous example of 5 is Take 5 by Dave Brubeck, the classic. The classic jazz song. That's in 5/4 time. Or you'll see 7/4 or 7/8 a lot. Like any alt-rock fans out there knows Spoon Man by Soundgarden, that tune's in 7. Or Ticks and Leeches by Tool is in 7. There's a lot of really great kind of hard rock stuff that happens in 7. Time signature changes, you'll see bands like Rush doing time changes. It's a very progressive thing to do. It definitely throws your audience through a loop, which is why not that many artists try actively to do that kind of a thing within their songs. Now, can it be done? Absolutely. You don't see it very often, but stick with me to week 10 of this course, and boy, do I have a track for you. I will just leave it at that. So, great question, though. And I love that you guys are thinking about all this stuff. How does 6 relate to this? What about odd times? What if you do this? What if you do that? Because that's exactly, never lose that spark of curiosity, because that's exactly where cool new ideas and cool new rhythms and cool new phrases come from, is going, hey, what happens if I play 5 over 11? Or, whatever wacky thing you decide to do. What if I play a phrase of 5 notes that's all dotted 8 notes over a groove in 7? I don't know. Try it. It's going to be really difficult to play. But you might stumble onto something really cool and really pretty, and you might, write your next opus based around something like that. I love playing around with rhythms in songwriting. So never lose that curious streak. Please, in all these lessons, keep the questions coming. I absolutely love where you guys are at and what you're thinking. But I think in terms of today, that will do it. Again, my name is Alex Scott here with jamplay.com. Thank you so much for joining me. If you guys have not subscribed or signed up for Jamplay yet, head over to jamplay.com. I highly recommend you do it. It's a fantastic site, and you'll get to see a whole lot more of my awkward face explaining silly music things. So if that's your bag, then head on over. But yeah, thank you guys again so much for joining me. We will be back next week, same time, same place, with more rhythms for you guys. I hope you have an awesome week. Good luck with your practicing sessions. And yeah, we'll see you next Wednesday. Bye.